present types. I don't wish to correct you there, Ben, but display navigator, of course. Yes, a couple of seasons with the Phantom and a couple of seasons with the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight, as well as privileged to be a part of the Flight Control Committee here at RIAT and the Cosmos over the last Fighting Falcon. Now, the aircraft very much a Lockheed Martin product, but this one from the General Dynamics era, albeit licensed produced by Fokker in the Netherlands for the Royal Netherlands Air Force. No special colour scheme on the aeroplane this year being displayed by the Dutch, but the routine we're about to see equally as impressive. Rolling now, the General Dynamics F-16AM Fighting Falcon. Just to get to the 230 metre line, to the top, and then the engine will off the back to ensure that the aircraft doesn't accelerate too much in the vertical. The aircraft being flown for us today by the new Dutch F-16 display pilot for this and next season, Captain Jeroen Slick Dickens. He is from 323 Squadron at Leeuwarden. Crew members apart from Slick are drawn from both the Leeuwarden-based Squadron 322 and 323. And you see the two extremes really on this display, the high speed manoeuvring, pulling up to 8 to 9G, followed by this, which is incredibly impressive, this slow speed aircraft flying at combat stands at 71 killed for no losses. Notably, these took place in Operation Desert Storm in the Gulf in 1991, the various Balkans conflicts, and then over more recent combat theatres. And all the while, even the older F-16s, like those operated by the Dutch, have remained relevant. Midlife upgrade to their F-16s, which has brought their capabilities close to those of the newer production C and D models. The aircraft slowing down now, flaps and undercarriage coming down for a touch and go. But down quite considerably in recent years.
obviously the end of the Cold War helping see to that. But now slick coming in for that low approach. Very recently, latterly doing so from Mazar in Sharif. And at the end of June, the Dutch F-16 contingent there was withdrawn. They carried out more than 10,000 sorties. As I was mentioning, newer variants of the F-16 have attracted new customers for the type, and one of the most interesting recent ones you may have read in the aviation press being the reconstituted Iraqi Air Force. Who would have thought just a few years ago that we'd see F-16s in service not just over Iraq, but with Iraq? So that's the Flying Coastal Command, or US Navy asset, but not so the machine that this depicts, because the 5th is from Duxford. Catalina's exploits in Royal Air Force Coastal Command service, in particular during the conventional land-based aircraft. German Focke-Wulf Condor aeroplanes were able to roam almost at will until the Catalina came along to close up the so-called North Atlantic gap. Robin Reliant als een vrienden als een SpaceX class opschrijven. Dat is echt gedaan. Another aircraft with some special markings, this German Navy Orion, and on the nose there you can see the badge. Takeoff in question being performed by the Alenia C-27J Spartan. takeoff, as the crew calls it, and into the first.
There. The aircraft is held down over the runway just to get some more energy, and that energy bleeds off around about 500 feet, and you would have seen the bunt forward just to control the indicated airspeed at that point.
The C-27J, a much developed version of the earlier Air Italia G222, from which we saw some very impressive demonstrations at Air Tattoo's past. Well, if anything, the C-27J has surpassed even that. And there's another aircraft that, in Italian hands, has seen a great deal of service in Afghanistan. Now positioning for a very unorthodox manoeuvre for a transport aircraft. There you have it, the first of a couple of rolls in the course of this display. The engine's two Rolls-Royce A2100Ds, including the US military for the Army, winning the joint US Army and US Air Force joint cargo aircraft deal. Also Bulgaria, Greece, Lithuania, who have an example in the static display here, Morocco, Romania and Slovakia. Now more aerobatic from the C-27J pulling up into a loop. About 250 knots, 800 feet. The Italian Air Force took on their first C-27Js in October 2006. They use it as a tactical troop and cargo transport, and it wasn't long before they were serving in Afghanistan, the type's first deployment there beginning in December 2008. Transport aircraft display, and a lot of crew cooperation required in a sequence such as this.
Yeah, absolutely, and the crew cooperation this starts from when the aircraft is designed. The tail area of a large aircraft like this is incredibly susceptible to high loads. Most large aircraft have an angle of bank limit somewhere in the region of 30 degrees. This aircraft is not what it's not designed. And we must also remember that this is not just an air show spectacular. This has practical applications in the military environment. Minutes to run the fighter out of either out of interest or out of fuel before it leaves you alone. I'd much rather be in an aircraft like this than one with less manoeuvre capability.
Well, now we see some more of that military capability in evidence on the next pass. the slowest run in the display, 110 knots, and down to 500 feet for what the crew calls the airdrop pass. Undercarriage coming down, and I expect to see the rear loading ramp on the C-27J open as well. C-27J, an aircraft thanks not least to its aerobatic capabilities, has won several of the flying display trophies. Once again we'll be seeing him rolling one way, there we go, and in the end turning the other. And we'll be seeing the aircraft coming in to land from the opposite direction to most of the landings today, so downwind. And here again the military capabilities of the design will be much in evidence, because we'll see the aircraft positioned quite high above the runway before coming in for a very steep approach, best known perhaps as the Khe-Sanh approach, as employed initially by the Americans in Vietnam. The rationale here, of course, is to keep the aircraft out of the vicinity of small arms fire that may be located around the airfield for as long as possible, so the aircraft remains at altitude until crossing the airfield boundary and getting to the runway. Then the nose comes steeply down and the aircraft comes in for a short tactical landing with reverse being applied on the engines. Also known as the Sarajevo approach from its application in that city during the Bosnian conflict of the 1990s. Nice touch with the flags from Major Fabio Di Michele and his crew from the Italian Air Force Flight Test Centre, completing their sequence on the Alenia C-27J Spark. Meanwhile, down at the right-hand end of the German Navy P3 returns to the runway so to take up its parking slot. We go down to the left-hand end, nor do we see the Army Air Corps contributions to the Class B program in positioning at the moment.
Yeah, it's not very often you see three aircraft positioning on a runway all at the same time, is it? It's quite an unusual thing. But yes, we're going to do something rather different now, and if you haven't seen the Army Air Corps Lynx aerobatic display before, then prepare to be somewhat surprised and amazed, because it is an extraordinary display, and it's still the
Tucano also going off to hold the next full display item prior to the Lynx should be the Estonian Air Force contribution. Estonian Air Force's Aero Vodokini L-39C Albatros. and there he goes. Personnel from RAF Lakenheath in Suffolk visiting Omari in April of this year to test the base's suitability as an alternative station for the Baltic Air Policing mission, as the importance of that and calling his display complete there, Lieutenant Colonel Arvo Palumai from the fixed-wing squadron of the Estonian Air Force. The Red 10 squadron leader Mike Ling joining us in the commentary box.
Hampshire there, where, of course, interestingly enough, Tim Prince spent many years in the 80s and early 90s with the International Air to 2 team, running many international air shows at the largest grass airfield in Europe, and a lot of fun we had indeed, cementing good relationships between the International Air to 2 and the Army Air Corps at the time. But keep your eyes to the right-hand side now, because running in is the same aircraft you saw getting airborne just a little bit earlier, the Mark 7 Lynx, very much the mainstay of Army Air Corps operations for many years, particularly through the 80s and 90s, and the 80s synonymous with the Cold War and the British Army of the Rhine.